Hello and welcome to another AutoCAD 2007 CAD clip, and we're talking about 3D, and in this particular lesson we're going to introduce you to perspective mode a little bit and talk also a little bit about grids and stuff like that. So now you'll notice that if you go into depending on whether you're in wireframe or your visual display, doesn't matter that much, but now you've got this fancy grid that you can put in here, and you'll notice that as I shift middle mouse button and kind of pan around and stuff, that we have this kind of virtual grid that kind of adapts. As you zoom in, it just kind of continuously grows and gets bigger and smaller, and that's kind of one of the nice things. And when I'm massing out things like this, I'm starting to actually use my grid in my snap down here a lot more, because we can use that with our dynamic UCS and everything else when we're kind of blocking things in. I'm going to go up here to my dashboard. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to the control panel. I'm going to turn on 3D navigation. And in 3D navigation, there's a great button over here called perspective. I'm going to turn perspective mode on. Okay, and now you can see that, and shift middle mouse button. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. We can zoom in maybe a little bit. We can rotate around this object, and I'm just going to get up higher so we can see a bit more of that grid. But as you can see, we can swivel around our 3D model, okay, while being in perspective mode, okay, and if we're zoomed out high enough, we'll see that that grid just kind of keeps growing and growing, which is really nice. Okay, so one of the things I can recommend, if you're going to start by doing, and you want to do kind of 3D perspective stuff, depending on what workspace you're set up for, when you go in here and you go File, New, and we pick a template, I'm going to go in, I have ADT running, I'm going to go to my AutoCAD templates, and if we sort by name, there's one called ACAD3D DWT. There's also an ISO 3D, and there's a whole ton more of new templates, by the way, so you can have a look through that. As you can clearly see, lots of different templates. But if you start off with an ACAD3D DWT template, be it in AutoCAD 3D, whether you're using AutoCAD or Architectural Desktop, if you use this as your default file, you will start with everything kind of half set up for you in here, which is really nice. And then you can quickly go in and start to mass your objects, and you can actually pan and stuff while you do this. And this is set up to be in perspective mode. If we go back to orthographic or parallel projection, it looks like that. But that template file starts you off with everything set up. So if you can't get it the way you want, just start with that template file, and then of course from there, and we can use our object snaps and everything else, in our 3D now. So we can very quickly draw objects in perspective mode, and then shift middle mouse button, we can swivel around and do all kinds of neat things with these objects. Okay, go in and draw another one, maybe snap to here, over to there, bring that up, and then maybe do a Boolean operation and say subtract this from this, enter. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try that again. Subtract from this, enter that, enter, and we can cut a hole in there, shift middle mouse button. You can kind of start to see that, how you can quickly go in and draw, and this is starting to look a little bit more like, like some other very less expensive 3D massing objects. And then of course I always go into my manage visual styles, and I'll go down to, for instance, my conceptual one, and the first thing I always do, you'll notice, is I turn on my jittering, and then I go back into here after I close that, set myself to be in that mode, and then you can union these two guys together, get that seam line in between. Okay, shift middle mouse. Okay, but now in AutoCAD, of course, probably one of the greatest things is you can actually draw in 3D, and you can draw in this perspective mode that I'm in. Remember, there's our parallel, there's our perspective on our 3D navigation. And if I want to draw something right on the surface, as long as my dynamic UCS is turned on, I can actually go here and I can hover over, maybe turn my snap off. Oh, let's make sure that my selection is turned on. Yes, hit OK. And try this again by clicking that. There we go. And you can see I can quickly draw right on the surface of that object in perspective mode, which is very handy. Okay, I've already shown you before how we can do it in just regular parallel, but just to prove a point, we can go into perspective mode and draw objects on the surface using our dynamic UCS all in perspective mode, which is really nice. So a couple things I want to point out is that if we go down controlling that grid, you'll notice it's kind of a virtual grid. You keep zooming out and it keeps showing it, and then it also respaces itself as it goes along. Okay, if you go down here to our good old snap and grid and you right click and you go into settings, you'll see that we have now display grid beyond the limits, which means that, you know, normally your grid will only fill your limits. So I don't want to have to review the limits command, but you have two corners of your limits, and normally your grid only fills that limits, and you get an error that it's too dense all the time. Display grid beyond limits is this virtual sizing. And then on top of that, we can say adaptive grid allow subdividing below the grid spacing. So if I get below this spacing, and as you zoom in and out, it will continuously adapt to that. And then we can also turn our snap on and off, and we can also set, we remember that if we set our grid to be 1, and it will follow the snap, etc. So we can use F9 and F7 to turn these on and off. Okay, so we've got our spacing, major line every 5th line. So every 5th increment, which would be every 2.5 units, or we can toggle this, it will put a major line. You can see in the background there's some darker white lines and some fainter ones. That's the major line. Okay, and then the adaptability and display. If I take this off, what'll happen is it'll only be controlled by what would be my limits. And we don't really use our limits that much. So back into my grid, and I can say yes, display that beyond. And then now what happens is two things. One, the grid will always be there. You can see the back horizon line here. And then two, it will also adapt as you go in. Okay, now if I actually turn my snap on and I draw, okay, every half unit. Let's go back and let's actually change that. Okay, let's set our snap to be every 10 units, and then equal, I just click in there and hits that. Now I'm jumping to every 10 units. Now when I go in, I can quickly go in and draw, and it snaps in nice increments like that. Okay, so using those tools, we can very quickly go back and create little mass models. And notice that even when you're in a top view over here, you can still be in perspective view. You can see it's kind of a neat view. And then shift middle mouse button, we can quickly zoom in over here. Okay, and I like kind of drawing in this mode, and we'll learn how we can set up some cameras. And all I'm doing is middle mouse buttoning and panning around with that grid and everything. And I used my ACAD 3D DWT template to start this off. So very quickly you can go in here, go back to here, maybe go to regular parallel view and quickly go in and start to mass some objects in here all over the place. It doesn't matter. I'm using very basic shapes here like that, and then we can go to our 3D view. And then once we get in our 3D view, we go to our 3D navigation and we give ourselves a perspective, shift middle mouse button, and you're on your way to Vegas. Okay, so hopefully that's a little bit of use. Maybe have a look in the help menu in that grid and snap dialog box. But I have to say that I've quite enjoyed being able to go in now and mass and draw things accurately while in perspective mode. It's kind of fun to do this with clients and stuff. So have some fun with the new perspective tools in AutoCAD 2007.